Belonging. We know we want to belong and be a part of a group or groups. Belonging is a topic that has gained momentum in the last couple of years, but much of that conversation has been initiative based, not leadership based. Our guest today thinks belonging is a leadership imperative. I believe you will find this conversation exciting, insightful, and actionable. Welcome to another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast, where we are helping leaders grow personally and professionally to lead more effectively and make a bigger difference for their teams, organizations, and the world. If you are listening to this podcast, you could be live for future episodes on your favorite social channel. You can get access and information about when those will take place by joining our Facebook or LinkedIn groups. Just go to remarkablepodcast.com/Facebook or remarkablepodcast.com/LinkedIn. Hope you'll do that. And let me tell you that today's episode is brought to you by our newest product, the Productivity Intensive, a 45-day process to improve your productivity for the rest of your life. Learn more by going to remarkablepodcast.com/productivity. That's remarkablepodcast.com/productivity. With that, I'm going to bring in our guest. As long as I don't hide something there. Here we go. There he is. His name is Brad Deitzer. And let me introduce him to you, and then we'll dive in. Brad is the visionary leader behind Deitzer and the Deitzer Clarity Institute, with leadership learning labs in Houston, New York, Bermuda, and Arizona. He is a trusted counselor, executive coach, and leadership guru for CEOs, board chairs, and top corporate management. He's recognized for his ability to navigate complex, contentious, and ambiguous business and people challenges both inside and outside organizations. He's sought after as an authority and innovative thinker on matters of organizational change, belonging, surprisingly not, and complexity in leadership. He is the best-selling author of Leading Clarity, the breakthrough strategy to unleash people, profit, and performance, and his new book, and one of the reasons he's here, Belonging Rules, 5 Critical Actions That Build Unity and Foster Performance. Brad, you were here once before, 4 years and 2 months ago, specifically. And when we got on ahead of time here, you said, yeah, but before it wasn't live, was it? Well, no, it also wasn't on video. We'll put a link to our first conversation with Brad about clarity in the show notes. But Brad, thanks for being here. Glad to have you back.
Oh, thanks. I'm so excited to be back with you. My favorite stuff to talk about, leadership.
And so, exactly. So it's one of the things we have in common. So you see, we got Chicago in the house. We got Hershey, Pennsylvania. Jennifer, that's just going to make me hungry. And Miss Cat on our team is here from Kalamazoo. Well, it's a little south of Kalamazoo, actually. Brad, let's start here. This book is called Belonging Rules. It's about belonging. So why or what led you to write this particular book?
It's funny. I originally was writing a very different book. The book I was going to write was called The Leader of You, and I began the journey to write that book and talk about how we're all leaders. We're all leaders. We're born to be leaders. Maybe leader of one, maybe leader of many, but that was the direction of the book. And then things in the world changed, and we had George Floyd's murder. We had social unrest. We had a lot of different things that my business was thrust into the middle of. And the more that we got into those conversations, and it really, some of the most challenging, vitriolic conversations around social issues, political issues, societal just issues. Some people around me said, Brad, you got to share what you're doing to bring people together. You got to share the research you're doing around what it means to belong. And so we shifted. And so this book, Belonging Rules, is really my way to tell the story, to give leaders not what to do, because I think leaders invariably know what they need to do, what's right for them and their organizations, but simply give them a roadmap of how to address the complexities in today's environment.
So I'm going to read your definition on page 4, and then let you just go from there, rather than I didn't want to be Mike Wallace and put you on the spot. So I'm going to read what you wrote, and then let you talk about it as a definition of belonging. Belonging is where we hold space for something of shared importance. It's where we come together on values, purpose, and identity, a space of acceptance where agreement is not required, but a shared framework is understood. where there is an invitation into the space, an intentional choice to take part in something vital to a sense of connection, security, and acceptance. There's a lot of words there, but why don't you unpack that just a little bit more for us?
So when we started on this project, one of the first things we did was we began to ask the question, how do people think about belonging? How do they define the concept of belonging to them? And what we found is there were no two answers that were the same. We talked to hundreds, thousands of people, and it was really interesting that people had very different ways to describe it. So part of our journey was to say, all right, let's take some of these concepts and what are the things that we've learned from leaders? What are the things that we believe as an organization and our research shows? So breaking down the definition, belonging is where we hold space for something of shared importance. This is where it starts. And we like to think about this, and we think about space in a lot of different ways. But where we hold space for something of shared importance, it's gotta that's the thing that connects us. It's the space. It could be physical space. It doesn't have to be, real space. But how do we create those spaces of something that we all think is important? So if it's important, we want to bring people in. The second part is where we come together on values, on purpose, on identity, and we'll talk in a little bit about the rule, the third rule, which is choosing identity over purpose. But it's this idea that identity is really what connects us. We bring our uniqueness of our own selves into our companies, into our work, but we're part of a larger ecosystem. And we're connected in that ecosystem when we think about, the shared identity of what that organization stands for. The next element of this is one that I think is the one that we struggle with a lot. And it's a sense of acceptance where agreement is not required, but a shared framework is understood. And so this idea here is, yeah, there is a sense of acceptance. I am who I am. My ideas are what my ideas are. You and I don't have to agree, Kevin. We don't have to agree in order to belong. And I think this is really a fundamental shift in how people think in today's society. We think that, well, in order for us to belong, we all watch the same things. I'm going to watch things that fit my mental models of the world, and we've gotten siloed. And so this is about, we don't have to agree to belong, but there is a shared framework, and we understand, hey, this is the framework that that we're part of. There's an invitation into the space. We talk about human-centered leadership. It requires the leader to reach out, to open a door, to invite people in. That invitation is missing for so many different people at different levels in the organization, at different places or stages in their careers. We're left on the sideline, and it's an intentional choice to take part in. It is that choice to take part in, and it's something that creates that sense of connection, security, and acceptance. Again, even if we don't agree.
Well, you can see that I had pre-written this quote. We don't have to agree to belong. I mean, I completely agree with this statement, and I can think of a lot of situations in my life where that is completely true. And yet, man, that's not really sort of how the world is living right now, to your very point. And so I would actually say to all of you that are watching or listening that, man, if this is the only thing you get from this, this is worth your time. Like that alone, to me is a great value. You've started to hint at this a little bit, Brad, but I really want to go back. I hinted at it in the open, that I said that you believe that belonging is a leadership imperative. In the book, you talk about it as a leadership conversation. So what do you mean about belonging being a leadership conversation?
This starts with the idea that leaders have a choice. We have a choice of how we're going to lead, how we're going to connect, how we're going to bring people in to that conversation. And so that's when we talk about it as a leadership conversation, it links very directly with that idea of an invitation. That invitation is important. And sometimes the conversation is spoken, sometimes the conversation is unspoken, but it's through our actions. Either way, it creates that connection, which is how we think about that conversation.
I think the thing that I'm going to remember the most about the book, and when you, Brad, when you do this, and I have the good fortune of having a guest like you every week, that means that just for this project, I'm reading 50 books a year, right? And the thing I'm going to most remember about this book is that word, invitation. The idea of what do we need to be doing as leaders to invite people in? And when you think about, people belong. I mean, if we think about this very simply, if you invite someone in, they have the chance to come in and belong. And yet, so you're talking about this at a higher level, but yet at that fundamental level, to me, that leadership invitation is such an important piece of this. Anything more you want to say about that?
Yeah, I love that that's something that's important to you, because to me, it is that invitation that is missing. I spoke to a big group at a Hispanic chamber event, and the feedback was, we want to be part of the conversation, but we're left on the outside. In our learning labs, we use different types of very creative things to illustrate this. And one of my favorite, and I think you've read about it in the book, is the picket fence. And we have a picket fence in every one of our offices. And the reason for it is that sometimes we don't realize which side of the fence we're on. Sometimes we forget when we've been invited in, when we have been left on the outside, how we feel. Sometimes we don't even think about bringing someone over because we assume that they're already inside the fence or outside the fence with us. So it's an important concept, and it doesn't matter what level of an organization you are at. And so to me, this is a major leadership learning opportunity, or reminder, maybe is a better way to put it, that no matter where we are, we have that ability to invite people in. I can be the leader who answers the phone at my organization. My voice, what I do, brings them into my organization. That's that invitation. Or it can be a leader and how they're communicating and talking with the rest of the workforce. So it doesn't matter if you're thinking from a hierarchical structure, up, down, or across. We all have that opportunity. And Kevin, one of the things that I love to challenge people with is to say, hey, this week, can you find one person each day to invite into your thinking, invite into your organization? So it's kind of that invitation challenge.
I love that. The idea of the fence. But one of the things that I kept thinking about as I was reading about the fence is I was asking, what if there is no fence? Like, I know that we've just talked about the metaphor of the fence and making sure that people are on the same side, or which side, or the assumptions related to that. But what happens if how does that idea relate to belonging if the fence goes away? Because like I've lived in houses where there was a fence, and I've lived in houses like where I live now where there is no fence, right? I grew up on a farm, so I know about fences. So tell me about what happens if there is no fence, or how does that relate to the metaphor?
Well, I would love more than anything for us to remove the fences. I would love for us to remove anything that is between us and someone else in an organization. I would love to create, going back to the definition, how do we create spaces for belonging? How do we create these open spaces of things that are shared importance? So that to me is where I start with that, by saying, hey, let's get rid of the fence. Let's just open it up. And it's a shared space for conversation. And when we realize that we're together on things that we share, and it's okay to disagree, do we really need the fence?
Yeah. No, I agree. I just wanted to have you talk about that a little bit. I figured we'd be in the same place with that. So you hinted at this earlier as well, that there are 5 rules of belonging. I put one of them up because you were talking about it, but the 5 belonging rules. Why don't you just quickly? We'll dive in a little bit more, but quickly go through the 5 so people have the framework that we're going to talk about for a few minutes.
Sure. So there are 5 belonging rules. They're based in research. They're based in experience working across the globe with leaders and organizations. Rule number 1 is turn into the power. Rule number 2 is listen without labels. Rule number 3 is choose identity over purpose. Rule number 4 is demand 100% of the truth. And rule number 5 is challenge everything. The order
I think I
doesn't
got them
matter.
backwards. Sorry about that.
You know what? It doesn't matter. They're all there. And it's funny. It's funny because a number of conversations, Kevin, that we've had recently, those last 2 are flipped, and they're the 2 in the equation that to me can be flipped. They play with each other in some way. The key to me in our work here is just starting with turning into the power, listening without labels, and that's where it starts. Where we go into from that after, it's picking and choosing. Again, the rules are designed for the how. How do we think about this human-centered leadership? How do we address complex issues? That's where the rules come in. Well, it may be rule number 5, it may be rule number 4, it may be all of them and how they're held together, they're tethered together.
So one of the things that because I read so many books, I'm always fascinated when there's a statement or there's a rule or there's a piece of the puzzle that might seem counterintuitive or isn't immediately obvious. Like, I don't want to underestimate the power of listen without labels. And you've got some really great stuff in the book about that. I love that. And what I would say is that there are books around this kind of area around belonging, and this is the whole book. So I am not discounting this idea, but there's a couple other things here that might not immediately make sense to people that I want you to unpack a little bit more. You hinted at it already, but I want you to go deeper into the idea of choose identity over purpose. If someone's listening, choose identity over purpose. What about purpose is like a big deal? Isn't identity like separating us out? Like, tell me about this, because this doesn't immediately make sense to me, Brad.
It doesn't make sense to a lot of people when we start the conversation. And the hope is that as we get into the conversation, there's kind of an aha going, yeah, we're conditioned to believe that purpose is our everything. It's our why. It's why we exist. It's why we do what we do. And so what is bigger than that? Thinking about it from a military perspective, nothing's more important than the purpose. This mission, this is where we're connected on this thing. And so we agree with that. Purpose is really important. But identity is what grounds us and connects us in a broader way, of which purpose is a part. And so when we think about identity, we're not thinking about identity through a lens of how I identify myself as an individual. I'm thinking holistically about an organization, that me and my uniqueness, you, Kevin, and your uniqueness, all the different people come together. Again, that shared sense of belonging here. What are we belonging to? It's this identity. And so we think about identity starting with purpose, the why we exist. We think about identity as characteristics. What are the things that are central, enduring, and distinct about our organization? In other words, what is
Yeah, so
true.
I would stop you right there because
Yeah.
you're and you talk about it in the book. It's not my identity, it's our identity. It's we, not me. And so that's where I want to stop you right there. You didn't just say my identity, but our identity as an organization. Sorry to interrupt you, but that's such an important piece of this, to, for at least in terms of helping me understand what you meant, and I think it'll help others as well.
Well, thank you for that, because it's a huge piece of this, because we see and what we read and we think about social media and all the things that it's all about our individual identities and respecting our identities. And the organization brings all those unique identities in. If you're a company of two, it's two unique identities. If it's a company of 1,000, it's 1,000. But when we're part of something bigger than ourselves, we have to come together on this shared sense of values, purpose, and identity. And so being clear, the highest performing organizations, the highest performing teams sometimes don't have the clarity around their identity. And so again, it's characteristics, it's purpose, it's values. And we add another step to this, which is the behavioral expectations. What are the behaviors that we expect at of everybody in the organization? What are the behaviors we expect of managers in the organization, of supervisors, of leaders? So going back to our conversation from 4 years and 2 months ago, I think you said,
Yeah.
it's about clarity and how clear we are with what we expect. And when we realize that we're not products of our environment, we're products of our expectations, it's up to the leaders to set the expectation of what we want people to do and live up to. And I believe that people desperately want to be part of something bigger than themselves. So this is our way to create that definition around that.
And that's the hook back to your work around clarity, because until I'm clear about what's expected, how do I even know how I have no benchmark about how I'm doing. I have no idea where I need to go. And without that, how can I really belong? Right. So there's another one of these of these 5 rules that you can't just read it and sort of know what it is. And that's the idea of challenge everything. I mean, you opened up by saying we're living in a time where there's division, there's vitriol, there's clashes, there's people retreating to their corners, all that sort of stuff. And and in that context, when you hear the rule of challenge everything, you might say, well, isn't that just leaning into that division? You're saying the opposite. What do you mean?
So challenge is to me is a creative multiplier. So what happens is sometimes in organizations and sometimes from a leadership perspective, we confuse the concept of conflict and challenge. And so to me, conflict is this idea where two sides are coming at each other. And the greatest picture that we can have of this, look no farther than politics. And it doesn't matter what level, it's built on the idea of conflict. If we don't stay engaged, if there's not a winner and a loser, then we're losing. And so the idea of conflict is, how do we stay engaged with everything hooked together, the friction constant, and I'm winning, you're losing, I'm winning. But that's
Right.
not healthy in organizations. It's not healthy in families. It's not healthy in any dynamic. So what we believe though is looking at challenge through that creative lens. Challenge is when two different people come together with a different mental framework and a mindset of, hey, you have an idea, I have an idea. How do we come together to make sure that these ideas are the best ideas, or maybe there's a better idea out there? And so I look at so many times where we avoid challenging because we don't want to seem argumentative. We don't want to ruffle feathers. We don't want to push something. Fortunately or unfortunately, the people who work with me, whether it's in coaching, whether it's in my consulting, whether it's in my teamwork, my job is to challenge, and sometimes it's to get people from where they are to that next best place or the next best place. And how do we think about this not from the friction and the conflict, but from the creative side of it? And that's why we've created the Effective Challenge. And the Effective Challenge is a tool that is designed to teach people how to do this in a non-confrontational way, in a, hey, a positive based, we're all in this, let's just get the right idea.
Nearer the end of the book, you introduce the idea of the box of belonging, and we don't have a lot of time left, but I really want you to introduce that idea and give us the components of the box of belonging, because I think ultimately that's where we're trying to get here. And so talk to us about that just a little bit.
So we really start with a premise, and it's a premise that we've talked about in our first book with the box. And I think the box really is important in this conversation, just thinking about it. And it starts with the idea that the box, it goes back to that old question of, are you an inside the box thinker or an outside the box thinker? The box of belonging right there. And so we think about, we want to create that mental model, if you will. And the mental model is around, it doesn't matter if we're inside the box or outside the box. It's understanding that the framework of a box gives us a better chance to lead, and it creates a space as leaders to invite people in to belong. So we have four sides of the what we call the box of belonging. We have the social side and the personal side. That gets into your unique leadership characteristics, the behaviors that define you as a leader. That's what we call the relational system, the social and the personal. And then we have the other side of the box is the adaptable, is one side of the box, and the intentional side of the box, which is the agile system. And so each of these four sides of the box become important to really, from a self-reflective perspective, to think about, all right, as a leader, I know that I'm not going to ever be great at everything, but I want to sometimes improve on the areas that I'm not the strongest in. But most of the times, I'm really looking to double down on my strengths, because that's going to take me farther. So each side of the box has different set of behavioral competencies that we've defined for each, to give leaders the chance to say, on the personal side of the box, am I being mindful? What does that look like? How does that show up? Do I demonstrate courage and grit? And so those are some of the questions. Recognizing potential. Those are three things that kind of make up that personal side of the box. So each side has different things to think about. And one of my favorite things about the belonging box is we encourage leaders to do these exercises, sometimes in front of a mirror, taking a marker and marking down on the mirror when you're looking directly at the mirror, seeing yourself. It's really hard to think about, wow, on this personal side, am I being mindful, not just of myself, but for how someone else might feel or experience a situation? How do I use that competency to bring them over? Am I demonstrating courage and grit? The reality of belonging, Kevin, and I think we talked about this a little bit before, is belonging takes courage. This is not an easy conversation, because when you think about society and you think about the polarity and you think about the disconnects that exist in society, we've got to go right into it. And it takes courage. Now, some people will say, well, I have to be careful because I have my whole career in front of me. And the answer is, you're right. You do. But it still takes courage to engage in that conversation, as you alluded to before. It's bringing them into it to have that conversation. And it takes guts. How we approach a senior leader in a company, a manager, an owner of a company, a CEO. It's not with, why have you done this? Why are you doing this? Why are we doing this? It's, hey, I'd love to understand. Can you explain? I really want to learn. And so what happens is that's inviting people into the conversation.
So, Brad, if you only had one more thing that you could say to the leaders who are watching or listening, uh, if you had only one more thing you could say to them about the idea of belonging and their role in it, what would that be?
The most important thing I tell you is belonging is not only good and right for your people who work with you, who work for you. Belonging has become a business imperative. The research is conclusive that belonging is now trumps strategy and culture in the hierarchy of the three most important things that drive satisfaction, that drive engagement, that drive retention. People today are willing to give up salary. And I think this is like one of those aha moments. They're willing to give back salary to be part of an organization where they feel like they belong. So it's good for you, it's good for someone else, and it's really good for your bottom line.
Sounds pretty good to me. There's a couple more things I want us to do, Brad, before we wrap up, and to do that, I'm going to shift gears. So the question is, when you're not leading your further and further flung business and working with your clients, what do you do for fun?
I am with my family, who make they're the people who make me know I belong. I any chance I can be with my wife, my daughter, my son. They're in different parts of the country. It's connecting with them. It's traveling with them. So I love that, and I'm really trying to get to a place of creating some form of finding ways to be healthy. So I'm always exploring new ways of being healthy, whether it's through food, whether it's exercise, whether it's acupuncture or different ways. So I love to explore. My mind is open for anything that's new.
All right. And speaking of having an open mind, I know that you, like me, are a reader. What are you reading these days?
I am reading, and this may be a different answer to the question. I'm
It's
reading
okay.
things. I'm reading some things that I are my favorite things to read that I go back to read. And so one of them is The Other Westmore. It's a book by the governor of now the governor of Maryland, and I love the story, and I it reminds me of kind of why we do what we do, and that's about setting expectations and helping people achieve something very different in their life. Maybe it's something that they weren't supposed to achieve. So that's one I love to read and reread. Um, and the other one is my absolute go-to book. It's counterintuitive to all leadership, but oh the places you will go. The place will go with Dr. Seuss, because I think that we all get in ruts, and the way the brain works, and we have 80,000 thoughts a day. 90% of them are repeat. 85% of those have some weight, or there's some form of bias. So I love the idea of what Dr. Seuss says is it's the imagination. And so I try to read that as often as I can. I have it sitting on my desk, and just as a reminder that the future is ours to figure out. Where is it that we want to go?
Brad, I don't know where. I'll have to see if I can figure this out and put it in the show notes. But I'm confident that we've had at least one other guest give the Dr. Seuss book, and if we can find it, we'll put it in the show notes, everybody. But I'm almost positive you're not the first person to use that example. So I appreciate that. The question that you've most wanted us to ask you. I mean, we are talking to you about your new book, Belonging Rules. Where do you want to point people? Where can they learn more about you, your book? Where do you want to point people?
People can come visit me at our website, Deitzer.com, DEUTSER.com. It talks about our human approach to organizations. Also, you can go to instituteforbelonging.com, and it's our new institute that we're looking for fellows all over the country and world to support our research, and we're doing some really amazing things with organizations. So you can find us through Deitzer or Institute for Belonging.
InstituteForBelonging.com, Deitzer.com. Now, a question before we finish, a question for all of you who are watching or listening. And the question is to ask you this every single episode. Now what? What action are you going to take as a result of being here? Because if you don't, like, what was the point? Maybe you got some new things to read, including Belonging Rules. Maybe you got a new way to think about the word or the idea of challenge. Maybe you're thinking about how you could apply this idea of invitation, or the idea of which side of the fence are people on, or whatever it might be. Those are just a few of the things that I wrote down. The challenge to you is to say, what action will I take as a result of having been here? Because when you do that, good things will happen for you and your team. Brad, thanks so much for being here. A pleasure to have you back, and wish you all the best with this great new book.
Thank you so much. Thanks for what you do for leaders all over. I love it.
Great. It's my pleasure. So everybody, one of those things we do is have this podcast, and we'll be back again next week. So I hope that you'll come back. If this is your first time, I hope you'll come back. Go to wherever you get your podcasts and subscribe. Give us a review, give us some likes, tell a friend to come join us. We're here every week with another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. Thanks, everybody.